Okay, then. So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name's Martin. I'm the Marketing Events Manager for Transparity. It's great to have you all here today. Before we dive into today's session, I'd just like to take a moment to introduce you to Transparity. We're a Microsoft pure play partner at the forefront of the latest technology, with one goal to help you make the most of your cloud investment in a way that truly benefits your organization. Our name stands for transformation, partnership, and clarity, three values that define everything we do. We're not just about technology, we're out working alongside you to drive meaningful business transformation. With deep technical expertise and a consultative approach, we help organizations move beyond outdated technology and thinking into the modern digital era. Before we begin, please note that today's session is being recorded and will be uploaded to our company's YouTube channel and made available on our website. If you do not wish for your audio to be included in the recording, please stay muted and ask any questions via the chat. I will be keeping an eye on for questions, and we will have points throughout today where we can stop for a bit of Q&A with Ant. So yeah, feel free to drop anything in the chat that you want to ask. With that, I'm going to hand you over to Ant, and he's going to get started.
Thank you, Martin. Welcome everyone to this live demo of Azure Virtual Desktop. I'm going to go through a very few slides. I really want to focus on the demo today, so we'll spend 5 minutes just introducing the service in case anyone's not aware of its capabilities and what it's for. But really, I want to spend at least 40 minutes in the demo. This session should only last around 45 minutes, so we'll have plenty of time at the end for any questions. But as Martin's mentioned, feel free to pop them into the chat, and I will stop at certain points just to see if there are any questions in there. But again, by all means, save them till the end. There'll be more than enough time. We've done the introduction, the overview of Transparity. I'll introduce myself. I'm Anthony Cook. I'm the head of the Azure practice here at Transparity. If you've ever been on events before around Azure or infrastructure, you've probably seen me present previously. The deck, the slides, I'm just going to use them quickly to give you an overview of AVD and its use cases, and talk a little bit about some of the benefits, specifically where we've seen benefits in certain businesses. But then we're going to go into the demo, and what I'm going to do in the demo is actually build out from scratch some session hosts, simple, but some session hosts, show you how to create them, access them, add applications, monitor them, and a few tips and tricks along the way around cost savings and cost optimization as well. And as I've said, there will be some time at the end for Q&A. So what is Azure Virtual Desktop? A very long time ago, it was actually called Windows Virtual Desktop. It's about 3 years now. It's a desktop and app virtualization service that runs completely in the Azure public cloud. You can actually have a little asterisk there and say that technically you can run this on-prem using things like Azure Local, where you need the hardware, but we have only ever seen this up to this point used running completely in Azure public cloud. And it provides the ability for businesses, or specifically users, to work anywhere in the world from almost any device. As long as it can run a HTML5 browser, it can run AVD. You can use single session to assign devices to people on a one-to-one kind of mapping, or you can utilize multi-session, so the ability to load multiple users on one session host using Windows 10, preferably 11. I'll show you on one of the slides one of the big benefits against anything such as, I don't know, Citrix or RDS or whatever, is the reduction in management overhead. A lot of it is managed and controlled by Microsoft, so there's a lot less you to manage and build when you're using AVD versus traditional virtualization options. You can get full desktop as a service, which is what we're going to see today. What I'm going to build today, and hopefully it'll work as well. That'd be nice. And you can install your own line of business apps, custom apps. It includes some there in Win32 format, MSIX and AppX. However, that's actually been decommissioned. And you can automatically auto scale and actually do some other things to reduce costs. And again, I'm going to show you that when we set up our own session host today in the demo. So it's desktop and app virtualization software with one of the biggest wins being the fact that there's a reduction in management overhead. I'd also say the ability to deploy this at scale really quickly. Again, it's dependent on the apps that you use, but you can do this very quickly. You can deliver Windows 10 or 11, preferably 11 now, or server desktops as well. And with those client OSs, you have the ability for multi-session using Windows 11. You can deploy and scale in minutes, which is hopefully what we'll show today. And in a lot of cases, you may already be eligible for this for the licensing. And just to touch on that, there are two ways in which you will consume costs for Azure Virtual Desktop. The first one being licensing, of course, and the second one being the services that are running in Azure, mostly virtual machines. In terms of those licensing, if you have E3, E5, F3, Business Premium, some of the enterprise SKUs, or all the enterprise SKUs, you may already be licensed to use this service. It's worth noting that you can license what's called external users. So maybe you've got some temporary workers that can actually be licensed on a pay-as-you-go method instead of licensing them and buying them E3s and E5s. And again, I can show you that in the demo. You have the ability to provide personal ownership. So multi-session hosts are amazing. They're very cost efficient. However, we've worked with some businesses, financial sector's one of them, where they may need access to the C drive, for example, or there's various reasons where you may actually just assign one machine to one person on a one-to-one relationship, and you can do that fine, or you can multi-session them. I've mentioned this already, but the ability to connect from any device, I'll show you within a browser today, but if you've got a smartwatch with a browser on it, you could do it. I wouldn't, but you can do it. And the big one, it's not new anymore. I can't speak about it as if it's new. It's been around for probably a couple of years, at least a year, but you can manage them via Intune. So you can manage the delivery of applications, for example, via Intune. So if you're already using that, again, you can see there from management overhead how simple this could be to deploy new applications. Some use cases. The obvious one, provide users ability to work from home using their own devices. WVD, which is now known as Azure Virtual Desktop, was released around the time of COVID. That was an obvious use case, and probably the first 20 to 30 customers we worked with, that was the reason why, just the ability to be able to work from home on their own device. Migration is fairly simple, whether that's from on-prem virtualization such as RDS or Citrix. One use case which pops up more, and will continue to do so actually, is VMware Horizon and the end of life of that product, and that is an obvious use case to migrate over to Azure. There's also, you may, another thing related to VMware is you may be running your current VDI solution on VMware servers. The pricing of that has changed since Broadcom took over, but actually some news that came out at the end of last week that the minimum calls on their hosts is very, very high. So we may see more customers again expecting a bigger VMware bill, and therefore AVD is a great use case to move straight to. If you've got certain applications that need to be secure for specific reasons or regulated, financial services, for example, it's really great. There's a lot of kind of security processes that you can implement over the top of this. And a really big one is great for Elastic Workforce. The ability to license to external users, first of all, but this can scale up and down however you wish, and you will optimize costs doing that. So you can very quickly provide access to remote workers, contractors, finally specialized workloads. I mentioned finance because it's something that we've done a lot of. I work with a lot of finance businesses that use this. They have their own special requirements, such as the ability to use a Bloomberg keyboard or run 6 monitors. Also an obvious one is low latency. And again, something I'll show in the demo, but latency, if it's important to you, thought needs to be put into the delivery of this. In the final slide, and we'll get into the demo, I mentioned around that reduction in management overhead. This image does a better job than any to show that, in the way that, there are no load balancing or gateways or connection brokers or licensing to deal with, other than to buy the licenses. That's all managed by Microsoft on the right-hand side. What you would need to manage, or if you're working with a partner or whoever to manage or even build this, is session hosts, virtual machines. That's where the additional cost comes from. Storage accounts. There's some networking costs in there as well, but they're the things that really you would build and you'd need to manage. If you're going to use Intune for this, the management overhead will reduce even more. There's less reliance on managing things like images and stuff like that. But let's get to the demo. Let's get in Azure. Let's get in the portal and let's see this thing actually being built. Not perfectly. I've just noted a few, but I want to go over them again because in Art Attack fashion, I've got some prereqs that have been done here before I do this. I've got licensing, it's important. An identity provider. So in this case, it will be Entra ID only. You may have domain controllers running in Azure. You may be using Entra domain services. It's irrelevant. You can go Entra only, but you do need to obviously get your identities from somewhere, and it's likely that they would already exist in Azure anyway, especially in Entra. You need a network, single network. Doesn't have to be peered to any other network at all, but it needs to exist for the VMs. You would also need a storage account. That's for profile management. You won't see this built today, but I will cover it now. If you have users that are multi-session or landing on multi-sessions, they will not land on the same virtual machine every time, unless you've only got one, which is unlikely. Therefore, they need their profile data to be roaming and move with them. And in this case, we would use FS Logics to do that. And therefore, it needs a storage account, Azure Files storage account, to be able to store that profile data. That would need to be in place, ideally, prior to building the session hosts. And finally, as with almost every single service you would ever deploy in Azure, if you want to monitor it and understand more about it, a log analytics workspace is required. So license, identity, networking, storage account, and a log analytics workspace. You don't have to have those in place, but it makes building it a lot simpler if you have. This is the main AVD screen. It's not shown a lot at the moment. If it's already been built, we can manage things on these left-hand side blades, which I'm going to go into in more detail. But I think the best way to show you what this is capable of and how it does things is actually just go ahead and create a host pool. As with everything, you need a resource group, the location of that resource group, and the location here is extremely important. You can do tests for this, but if latency is an issue, you want to be placing this in a data center or a region which would contain data centers close to where you would be working ideally. It can make it a lot better, the experience a lot better. But again, it depends on your apps and your requirements. But most of the time, it's likely this will be going into UK South. Let's give it a full name. Simple. And first of all, we get to our first part, which is around asking kind of, do we want this to be a desktop or is this going to be a remote app? I'm going to build this as a full desktop, Windows 11 with Office apps installed already, including Teams. I'll show you after that how you can side by side actually add just specific apps if that's what you want to give people access to, but we'll go for desktop as part of this demo. And then here we have the option for pooled or personal. It's worth noting you cannot mix them for obvious reasons. So this host pool is going to be a pooled host pool, which means we will have multiple session hosts and users will be placed on them however we decide, really, whichever way we want to, but there will be multiple sessions, so therefore we'll go for pooled. I'm going to leave create session host configuration as no, just because yes, it is in preview at the moment. If we have 50 users in sales, for example. It depends on the apps. It's something you should assess. It's something we assess. But depending on the apps, there needs to be get to a point where you understand what should the size of these machines be and how many of them may we need. And to understand that, it's also important to know when is the kind of peak times and when does it get really low, when are people logging off. Load balancing algorithm is essentially, do we stick the first 10 users all on VM1 before we put the next group onto VM2, or do we spread them evenly? And ideally, if the session hosts are running, you'd want to really spread them evenly because you'll always have the least amount of load on each session host. Doesn't really matter which one you choose. Here we can choose a max limit. That is important. If I know the compute and the application requirements of one user, then I know how many I should limit for each session host. In this example, we'll say 50 users in sales. We're going to put 10 on each session host and create 5. Again, that's a sizing thing. And if you do this well, you can see some optimizations in cost. If you have a big fluctuation where you might have 10 users logged in at 9 a.m. in the morning, 40 users logged in at 2, and then 15 when it gets to 5 o'clock, you'll benefit from having more session hosts because you can start to switch them off as people aren't on them, which I will cover. But it's a simple just what's the maximum amount of sessions that we want on these hosts. And now really the meat of it, of AVD, is build the session host, build those machines that these users will land on. I could have used them, I could have made them previously and add them in here, or I can make them from this screen. If you were in a situation where you were migrating from a Citrix or an RDS or something like that, it's likely that what we would actually do, or it can happen, is we will move those machines into Azure because they've got the images of what you've been using now, and then we will set them up to be AVD session hosts. So you can build AVD session hosts from in here, or you could have a VM that's already running and you can register that to make it an AVD session host. And again, that's more common when we look at migration scenarios. Resource group will be default as the host pool. Name prefix for the name of the session host. This is an Azure virtual machine. Remember me saying on the deck that you can actually run this locally. You would need Azure Local to do that and the hardware, but you can have this running in your own data center. But again, it's not something we see commonly used. It's fairly new option, in all honesty. Virtual machine location, UK South, easy. Availability zones or availability sets. Gone over this quite a bit, but for those who aren't aware, essentially an availability set is a separate location within a data center. So you might have 3 hosts and you might want them in different parts of that data center, different cooling, different power. That's an availability set. You get 99.95% uptime using those. Or, better option, use availability zones because they are different data centers completely. So we could say here, spread them across the different zones. That would give you 99.99% availability. Leave secure boot, beep TPM, the encryption type stuff, security stuff we'll leave it part of this demo. An important one to look at. The image. We're going to go down the route of Windows 11 because it makes sense. And we want that with Microsoft 365 applications, Office apps. So in this case, this is the perfect version for the demo. Again, you may already have your own image that you want to use here. But as a standard, as a starting point, and if we're making this for customers where they want to build a session host and the images from scratch, Windows 11 Enterprise Multi-Session is a great starting point. Size comes into play. I mentioned earlier on, you should already know the size by this point by understanding your users, understanding their own compute requirements of the applications. We'll leave it on this one for now because it's a demo, but in the real world, if I were going to have 10 users land on this, we'd probably go for something a little beefier. We'll go for 5. That's what we want. That's how many VMs we would like. Again, depending on apps, depending on performance requirements, you may want to use premium SSDs instead of standard. I wouldn't use HDDs for obvious reasons, but if you need the IOPS, then premium SSD may be useful. We see it sometimes, that's for sure, but don't just use it for the sake of it because there are additional costs there. We've got boot diagnostics enabled, great. You remember earlier on I mentioned one of the prereqs was a network. So again, find this network. It will choose a certain subnet. If you've got more than one subnet, you can select that one. And then in this case, it's also got a network security group assigned to it. I'm leaving most of these as default for now. I also spoke about identity providers. So here's the option. Is it Active Directory or is it Microsoft Entra? In this case, it's Entra. And if you're using Entra, as you can see there, and you're using Intune, you will get the ability to enroll this VM with Intune if you wish. I'm going to select no for the sake of this demo. That's better than that. This is for the local admin, by the way, virtual machine administrator. So this is something once you've set it, you need to keep safe. This is separate to like giving users access to the system, for example. That's really the meat of it. The next thing is something known as a workspace. Now, a workspace is a logical grouping of applications or application groups. And I'll explain it further on where it can make sense, where you may want to group things up for certain users. Maybe HR team has different apps to a sales team or whatever that may be, but it's just a way to group things up, especially if you've got a lot of session hosts and a lot of users. We've seen this used way above 1,000, 2,000 users. So after a bit, you need some kind of logical grouping. And you can do that with things like desktop apps, groups, and workspaces. As you can see here, you register an app group to a workspace. And then finally, we created a log analytics workspace, as I mentioned earlier on, because that was a prereq. And the reason for that was it will then enable you to send all that logging to that workspace and therefore see the monitoring. I could tag it. You should be tagging it. This is a demo. It's not needed. I'm not going to click create because in art attack fashion, I don't need to. We don't need to sit here and kind of watch it. But if you wanted to get your users testing a Windows 11 desktop today with Office apps on there, you would just go through that process there. Now, 99% of people we've worked with do not just want a Windows 11 desktop and only Office apps. Of course, there's any line of business app you can think of we have worked with. Sage is super, super common. So it's not always going to be as simple as this, but getting a proof of concept together, and obviously for the likes of a demo, it is actually a lot of filling out kind of fields and next finishing it. And you'll see that in a second, kind of created version of it. But in the real world, you may have applications that these customers access that have databases to them or need connections back to on-premises. So it can be a lot more complex. But for a simple user of a desktop and some 365 apps, this is the way you could do it. And remember that at this point, then you may go and use Intune to deploy the other apps. But it depends on the complexity of the users, what they're doing in the applications. But I'm not going to click create, but if I click create, it takes around, it does depend on how many session hosts, but you could expect it to be done in around 15 minutes, usually. And then here's one I created earlier. Change this. So we're just seeing this one. So this is a host pool using the exact same settings that I've just showed you. However, it's 2 machines instead of 5, just to speed things up a little bit. So if I go through this, I'm going to show you everything. Let's say that host pool we've just pressed create. 50 minutes later, this is what you would get. It shows my total machines and how many can connect at the moment. It's even showing some session information. As with anything in Azure, the activity log is going to tell me what's been changing, what's been happening on there. If someone goes in and stops a machine or resizes a machine, activity log will be the place to see that. Access control, as with every service, is around providing permissions, people within your teams or internally, and that's permissions to administer and manage AVD, not to access AVD. It's to be able to do things in this portal. That comes from access control. We've got tagging, we're not using in this scenario, and we have resource visualizer as well, which can be useful for monitoring. First tip, trick for optimizing costs. If we have sales and we have 50 people in sales, and we know we've got 5 session hosts that we need for them at peak, ideally what we want to be doing is firing up these machines only when they're needed, but also shutting them down when users aren't on them, because you are paying by the minute. It is by far the biggest cost for AVDs, those session hosts. If you can get them switched off for us, the most time, the better. And something that helps with that is something called a scaling plan, which I'll have to go back to show you how to create. And show you how it works and put some dummy data in here. I don't care where that goes. So you give it a name. Might be, I don't know, it's going to be an AVD sales. Location, usual, UK South. I can give it a friendly name. I can tell it what the host pool type will be, which is again usually pooled. And you can see here the scaling method. So power management auto scaling, which is what we all do. They'll be turned on and off to adjust available capacity. But you can also do it dynamically, as you can see there, by actually creating and deleting VMs. But that is in preview and not something we've used. But the main part of a scaling plan, the point of this is this here, this schedule. And essentially what this is about is, when will we see ramp up? So probably the start of the day, 9 a.m. Let's get a minimum percentage of the hosts going. So if we had 5 and we set it to 20%, we know at least one of them will be ready at 9. Maybe we want more. We have capacity thresholds as well. Then you can tell it peak time. When will peak time be expected? Ramp down, so probably at the end of the day. And with ramp down, you can leave a notification message. You can delay a force log off. So you can force sign off users. So there's not one session sat there keeping your session host burning cache all night. And anyone that's ever administered any type of software like this will know that there's often disconnected sessions and people that don't log out correctly. And then there's the off-peak hours. But the point is that based on percentages, you can tell this to fire up some of the VMs and shut them down as well. That will optimize costs significantly. Unless your business is 24/7, those machines should not be on 24/7. You could apply that rule to a lot of things, not just AVD, but that's especially true for AVD. You will save a majority of your cost doing that. Go back to our host pool. So that scaling plan. Get this over here. There's some kind of session behavior, RDP type properties and things like that you can set. Here I've got enter a single sign-on enabled, which you'll see when I log in. You can have things like session behavior, will it auto reconnect, auto detect bandwidth, compression on videos, things like that. 9 times out of 10, nothing's going to change there. Device redirection is important. So again, I told you around the Bloomberg keyboard and finance companies that need 6 monitors. You'll need to be looking at some of these settings to make sure that all that stuff's being redirected properly. But at the same time, in terms of security, you may want some of these things to be switched off. If you think things like clipboard redirection, the ability to copy things in and out of the session, stuff like that, you can get that set here. If you do need 6 monitors and you need them to be running 2K or something like that, again, which we've seen, you can do that from in here. You can set customized kind of sizing, resolution, if needs be. And then finally, you can do some more custom stuff. So anything that you change in any of these options here basically puts an entry in this RDP properties. But there are some other things out there as well. And sometimes when you're doing some, when you're resolving some issues, sometimes you may need to enter something in here to get it up and working again. But it's just worth noting that's where the RDP properties are. Usually, once you've set them, they'll stay the same. You won't really need to change them, but it's worth noting where they are. The second set of properties or settings, which I think is more important, is this set here. And biggest one being this option to start VM on Connect. So let's say your business is 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. That's great. And at 5 o'clock on Friday, you use a ramp down of a scaling plan and you get all of these machines switched off. But what if someone in sales may have a reason why wants to log in at 1 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday night and to do some extra work? If you enable start VM on Connect, they can do that. So it will keep the machines off, but when it sees someone trying to connect, it will fire one of them up for them. So you're optimizing costs as much as possible, but still giving 24/7 experience to your users if you want. The one caveat there would be the login procedure is going to take longer because the machine's not going to be sat there switched on ready for that user. So the login time will take longer. Once they're in, it will be normal. But it's something to be aware of. Why you wouldn't select this? I mean, I suppose there are some reasons, but if you're using multi-session and you're switching them off at night, if you ever think anyone might need to log in for some reason, use Start VM on Connect. It will allow you to do that. Validation environment is the ability to make an environment that's basically there for test purposes only. And that's what an invalidation environment is. And then finally, those two settings that I set earlier on when I created the session host, which was how do I want to load balance the users and what's the maximum amount of session limit? That can be changed. That is not something that's set in stone. And as you can see here, that's where you can change it. Networking is going to show me the network that I assigned it to, and simple as that. You can also do things like private endpoints. So if you want to keep the connectivity into this private and not over the internet, you can do private endpoints. Also, sometimes available, you can use something called RDP short path, which is a way of improving connections to this service. See manage. And we can see monitoring. What I'd like to do first, though, is actually show you how to log into this. So, once you've got the application group, which I've called here for the HR team, it's an AVD demo. Let's say it's a Windows 11 desktop. This is where I can assign people. So I would go to that application group. This is where I would make the assignments. Now I've given it to myself. You may have a group, like a sales team group, and it'll be quicker to do that and then assign it en masse. But this is different to IAM, where you're giving permissions for people to actually create AVD. When you want to give permissions to people to use it, it's done through this assignment here. So I have a Windows 11 session host built, they're on, and I'm assigned. Which means I go to the AVD login, and if the demo gods are looking down on me, don't share my demo password with the world. Oh, this is the login procedure. Now, AVDWS demo HR001 and the Windows 11 desktop. That's important. So when we're talking about workspaces and when we're talking about applications, that's what's showing. So I've created a session desktop here and called it a Windows 11 desktop. I could call that whatever I want. You might have other sessions as well and other types of desktops. You might call that the HR desktop or finance desktop, but that's what's pulling through here. And it's part of this workspace. So again, I might have multiple workspaces that I've got access to. You might have people in your business that need access to different apps across different verticals, for example. I get my usual RDP type of options. Don't use clipboard, file transfer, or printer. Again, I could limit this myself by doing the configuration. Let's allow it. If you remember as well, about 2 minutes ago, I showed you, because I'm using Enter ID, I showed you an option where I could select single sign-on. That's the reason why we didn't get another login screen there when I clicked on that desktop, and it actually took me straight through. And I'm in. I'm on an AVD. I'm on a Windows 11 session host with Office apps installed. And to get to this point for a proof of concept is the exact steps that I showed you in that demo. From start to finish, you could do it probably in 30 minutes. But again, that would be great for a proof of concept. If you're thinking about looking at different types of VDI solutions out there, it'll give you an idea and a feel for it. But the likelihood is you're going to have specific apps for your line of business. That will take a little bit more thought. But yeah, straight into AVD. If I want to come out of the session, I can. If I want to upload files to it, I can as well. It's not really much more to demo without just starting to demo Windows 11 at this point, but that's how simple it was in terms of creating that one. If I go back, what I want to show is, first of all, it knows about the active session that we're on. You can see it here, total sessions. But if I go to monitoring and load up insights, it's going to show me some more information. So we remove the other one, make it simpler. So it's going to show me the total hosts, total sessions and things like that. Connection diagnostics, so are we having any with potential issues, dropouts, anything like that? Utilization, but that's total users. You can see here connection reliability. So we have had one connection that dropped. You can diagnose that or look to diagnose that. Connection performance. So what milliseconds are we seeing? And again, these are the type of tests we've done before where we've had time latency, sensitive type applications. This stuff's super, super important. And this workbook, by the way, these insights here are out of the box. This is not something special that I've set up. I can see users. And then it'll show me, okay, Anthony, what's he doing? Is my average time on there? The applications I've used, connection time, where I'm actually connecting from. Anything around specific users, you can get that information. And then utilization, again, once you've deployed this in the real world, this screen's important because you will size this up at the start, or someone like a partner like us will size this up at the start. And then it's important when you're doing things like proof of concepts with a select group that you keep on top of these. Is it being utilized as much as before, or could we actually put more users on one of the session hosts? Because again, big cost savings if you can do that, but there's always a balance between saving money and performance for the end user. And because these run on virtual machines, you could create everything for a production environment and then 2 weeks in realize that actually the VMs needed to be a little bigger. But like any virtual machine in Azure, switch it off, resize it, restart it, you can go. So there's not some reconfiguration right to start to the beginning if you do need to resize, but understanding saturation of the host and things like that is extremely important. And there's dashboards like this which can assist. Clients will show different clients that are being used. There's only one, and it's HTML. It's me. Now I don't have any alerts set up at this moment, but you can set alerts up on AVD like you can any other service. That could go straight into maybe your ITSM tool, for example, or you might want it to email alerts. But as with any service, you can do it and monitor it here. And I'm not going to click on this option because when I do, it brings up a massive amount of sensitive information in terms of IDs. But if you want to license a user without a license and maybe they're temporary or they work for another business, you can get a per user pricing, and you can license on a per user basis via that option there. You would click on that, you can enroll, and then you can start to enable users that way. I can't remember the costs on the pricing calculator. I've got a feeling it's something like 14 or 15 pounds a month, I believe. Don't hold me to that. If you want to license external users, that's how you can do it. I'm going to show you one more thing that you can do. We've spoke a lot about desktops and the ability to provide desktops. Now, in the real world, we often see the requirement that actually we don't want to give our users full access to desktops. We just want to give them access to the specific applications they need. Okay, that's fine. And it's actually quite simple. The session host will always include the apps. The apps need to be on the session host. It's as simple as that. So if you take this example that we've built, we've got a Windows 11 machine that's got some Office apps. So we'll use one of those as an example, but create your session host with your apps on there. Sage, for example. That part remains the same. But if you don't need to give your users access to the full desktop, you can do it in a slightly different way. So I'll create an application group, stick it in any old RG. You have to tell it what the host pool is, because of course these apps live on a host pool. So where is that host pool? Where are the VMs? The one that we built earlier. We know it's going to be a remote app. The reason being is there's already one for desktop. So application group name, give the group name something like Office Apps. And then we go to add application. Now, this is looking at what's, on those session hosts and pulling them through. So let's say, I don't know, Word. We want to provide Word as an app. Simple as that. Has it got its own icon? Yes, if you're using your own custom applications or something off the shelf like a Sage or something, you can find out this URL and give it its proper logo, icon, sorry. Might fail, but it's fine. Yes, it does. Now, if I created this, or say if, we can assign it. So who is going to have access to this? Put myself in there. What workspace is it going to, are we going to make it a part of? If we wanted to, we might have put it a part of a workspace that already exists. And then as per usual, diagnostic settings as well, which is the diagnostic settings that you'll get from an app group isn't going to be great. But basically, what I'm trying to say is that if I wanted to create the ability just to access applications, it's as simple as doing what I've just done there. Then if I click review and create, what would then happen is in here, as well as having that desktop icon, I would also have a Word icon, and then I can just load Word. Now, obviously, you're not always going to have both. Usually you're providing apps or you're providing a full desktop. But the ability to provide those apps, once you've got those session hosts set up, is really simple and really easy to do. Give it 5 or 10 minutes once you've assigned it to the user, get them to log out, log back in again, and I would have a Word icon sat here. And if I wanted to on this application group, I could add more and more. So I could have all the Office apps here and do it in one package. Yeah, that's the way that you can give access to just applications and not the desktops. I think if there's anything worth noting, or the only other thing probably worth mentioning, it comes back to cost, is we're using virtual machines here. That's the biggest cost. You can use something called reserved instances in Azure for virtual machines that you may already be aware of, which is essentially instead of paying as you go, you commit to a 1 year, a 3 year, or even a 5 year. You commit to that. And because you're committing to have those machines for that length of time, you can see discounts, sometimes up to 50%, 60%. Find out which one's going to be most optimal for you, because it's going to be either a reserved instance or a scaling plan, not both. If you have a business which is fairly static, and you know it's almost the same every day, and you know you're going to be using this for at least 1 year or 3 years, reserved instances may be good for you. If you've got a business though where it only needs 9 to 5 to be working, you've got the option of using a reserved instance where you might save 50%, but you're going to save far more than 50% if you're only online 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. It means the majority of the time you're offline. And the point to remember here is a reserved instance is a commitment. You pay that amount fixed. So there's no reason to ever switch a machine off that's got a reserved instance on it, because you won't save any money. You've committed to the spend. So you might as well keep them on. So find out which one of those two options, in all honesty, it's usually scaling plans, is the most optimal for costs. And also obviously be aware that scaling plans, there's no commitment there, right? You're not tied in. So if you're a little unsure where you're going with your VDI solution, maybe scaling plans is safe anyway. But if you do pay for the reserved instances, why switch them off? Apart from patching, you're paying for it already. Yeah. Is there any questions whilst I'm still in the portal? Martin, I forgot to ask you, I should have asked you at least 3 times by this point, but is there any questions in the chat, mate?
Yeah, we've had some questions come in, so I'll just go through them now. So the first one was, are there any independent industry stats on market share for AVD versus Citrix versus anything else out there?
Possibly. I'm not that I'm aware of. I know there's some industry stats, especially around the finance sector, that Microsoft have got on their site. But what we'll do is, as we always do with these events, Martin, if you can jot that one down, and when we send an email out afterwards, I can possibly include that URL. But I know on Microsoft's website there is a financial sector, definitely, because they shout out about it.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we'll follow up post-event on that one. Next one is a question here that so we will be needing to use Teams local as well as Teams online with a different session or Zoom. Will the AVD option work with this with one camera, or would we need 2 web cameras? Also, what is the minimum OS requirement for remote users?
Minimum OS requirement really now is 11. You can run other OSs, but I would say 11 due to support. On the Teams piece, of course you can do online, of course you can do local. One thing to be aware of if you're going to do this yourself, that there are some enhancements that you can do to the registry to make your experience much better when using Teams. First of all, even if you're using Teams just on its own, be aware there are some optimizations. They are documented on Microsoft's website, but there are some registry changes that will make it a lot better. We've also worked with businesses where we've made Zoom work here. We've done it before on Thin clients where Zoom, we had to do certain patches and stuff. Now, in terms of at the same time on the ability, I'll be honest, we'd have to proof of concept it, but I see no reason why not. But that's something to run a proof of concept for 100%. To double check. So I'm not going to say that I've seen that in the wild and we've done that previously, but I don't see why it wouldn't work. I want to stick to that answer.
Very good answer. So another one here. Can you have 2 different groups, one on a scaling plan and the other using a reserved instance?
Yeah, 100%. We see that. That's common. If you know you've got those session hosts that maybe you've got workers at night and there's always a shift on, then you're not going to really use session plans, or you don't see the benefit from using session plans, definitely, 100%. Another thing to think there as well is if you're using personal desktop, so if you're not using multi-session and you're using personal, yes, they're probably going to be switched off in the evenings. But again, if you've got users that want to be logging in all the time, reserved instances. But yeah, 100%. And you can, by the way, you can technically put a scaling plan on a machine or on a session pool that has reserved instances. My point is there's just no real point to doing it because you won't benefit from the cost savings, but technically you can do it. The portal doesn't really have an understanding that reserved instances are on things, so it would never advise otherwise. And by the way, that's for any virtual machine, not even AVD. If you've got some SQL machine, which would be a bad idea to switch off, but anything internally, if that is only really needed 9 to 5, you're probably going to save more just switching it off after 5 o'clock than you will do from reserved instances. It's just working that maths out. And the longer your commitment, the bigger percentage you'll save. Not everyone wants to commit to a 5 year. How many businesses really know where their IT will be in 5 years? So anyway, I waffle to give you more info, but yes, you can. But yeah, do the maths first, basically.
Very good. And there was another one that was put in the chat, but someone's removed it. But I thought it was actually a really interesting question. So, and when you spoke earlier about setting up machines to the closest data center
Yeah.
and pointing there, someone had a question around employees that travel often. Can those data centers be shifted about?
The data centers cannot be shifted about. So you're creating, well, technically you can move a virtual machine actually from regions and things like that, but that would affect every other user. If you're in this scenario, and we've seen this before, where it's not so much that they've got users that travel a lot, it's just that they've got users in different parts of the world, you would create session pools specific to those users. You could use the same image, so they have the same apps. You could use FS logic, so their data follows them. But if they're in the US, they'd actually connect to a US session host. And if they're in the UK, they connect to one in the UK South, for example. I would do it that way. I wouldn't move them. Yeah, and that is a good question as well. I'm glad you brought that back up, Martin.
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting one. And that's all we've got at the moment. But of course, anyone feel free to stick any more in the chat.
Yeah, and before we finish, just really quickly, if you want a free of charge chat with myself or a pre-sales architect or someone within this practice, whether it's a little bit more of that demo, looking at some of your specifics, maybe you've got a list of applications that you're worried about, whatever that may be, it doesn't have to be set to this agenda. I believe, Martin, are you going to put a link in or
It's already up on the screen.
Yeah, feel free to sign up for that. Again, it is free of charge. It's 2 hours, but it's really, as long as it's AVD relevant, really use that 2 hours however you like. Yeah, I mean, if it's a simple proof of concept, like just the Office apps like I've just done, you can either get something like that done there. But yeah, feel free to sign up. It may be with me or it may be with one of our pre-sales architects. And I said it'd be 45 minutes. It was longer, as per usual. But I'm in time. Is there any other additional questions?
We've not had any come in, but I'll let everyone just have a moment if they've thought of something.
In the moment, yeah. I'm trying to think of any other tips. There is an automated builder into Azure that can create images, image builder. It's in preview at the moment, so it's a little flaky. So if you feel like getting your hands dirty with that, just be aware that it is still in preview. We won't demo anything that's in preview, and we very, very, very rarely will deploy anything to a customer that's in preview as well, because there's no SLAs behind it. But AVD has been a moving thing for a long time. We couldn't speak about scaling plans only just a year ago, I think. So if you see another one of these pop up next year, don't feel like it'll just be a lot of the same. AVD is definitely moving fast. So yeah, look out for when we'll probably do another one in a year's time. If there's no more questions, Martin.
I don't see any more questions, but thank you all for joining.
Yeah.
There will be an email later on today with some information, and we do have these sessions recorded, so they will be uploaded onto our website and onto YouTube in the next few days.
And thank you, everyone. We really appreciate it. Thank you for attending and the questions.
All right. Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you for attending.